I want to talk to you this evening about Straya Day. Notice I say Straya, not Australia Day. To me, Australia Day is not the 26th of January. To me, Australia Day is a point in the calendar yet to be defined, yet to be properly defined. The 26th of January represents the date that British colonisation of what we now call Australia took place. The 26th of January is the date that 11 ships of the British fleet entered Sydney Cove or Botany Bay, depending on which school you went to. Those ships carried, amongst other things, colonists who were deemed to be criminals in the British legal system. Those people may have stolen a loaf of bread, lifted a waistcoat or two, been a pickpocket, or merely served to feed their families through theft of a meal. They were the downtrodden of society, British society. They were the equivalent of our lower middle class and the poor in our country today. These days, we don't get shipped off to some deserted island. Oh, hang on a minute. We do. Well, we don't. We who are born here don't. We have citizenship. Aren't we lucky? Those people who come here from other places, if they come on rickety boats and not on expensive jet aircraft, they get shipped off to penal colonies. I think Manus Island and Nauru come to mind. I think I'm correct there. There's still some 1,000 or 1,200 people, including children, and don't believe the bullshit the government tells you, there are children on Nauru. Those people are still held in limbo. Years, in fact close on a decade, since the Australian Customs Service and these days Border Protection stopped them from landing on Australian soil and carted them off to some deserted island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. When we think about deserted islands and penal colonies, think about Devil's Island, French Guiana, Papillon. We're not doing anything different. Anyway, that aside, that's just an issue that you can chew over as you will. I want to talk about the 26th of January as a date when we may or may not choose to celebrate Straya Day. The 26th of January is simply a date in history when British colonialism took place in this country. At that stage it wasn't a country. At that stage it wasn't even a continent. Nobody realised that there was anything west of the east coast of Australia. In fact, Arthur Phillip, when his 11 ships landed and set up their tents and corralled all the so-called colonists, the criminals, occupied a very small piece of ground in and around what's now called Sydney. The real occupants of that land have since been long dispossessed. The real occupants of that land, the owners, if you will, are the original inhabitants of this country who have been here 60,000 years. Let that sink in. 60,000 years. British colonialism has only been active in this country for just over 200. Now, we don't call ourselves British these days. We call ourselves Australian. But let me acquaint you with a few facts. I'm going to read from some stuff I did a quick Google on earlier on. 1770. That rings a bell, doesn't it? 1770. Captain James Cook raised the Union Jack, that's the flag of the British Empire, on what is now called Possession Island on the 22nd of August 1770 to claim the eastern half of the continent as New South Wales. Now, one presumes that they understood that there was a western half because the Dutch had already been there. But the Dutch never claimed it. The Dutch never claimed sovereignty. Captain Arthur Phillip, the commander of the first fleet of 11 convict ships and the first governor of New South Wales, arrived at Sydney Cove on the 26th of January 1788. So that's 18 years after Cook raised the original Union Jack. Phillip raised the Union Jack to signal the beginning of a colony. Now, that colony was a penal colony. It was a subset of British civilization, if you want to call it that, British society. It was the bottom rung, the absolute bottom rung of that society. A penal colony. The 26th of January does not represent the establishment of the nation we call Australia. It represents only the establishment of a penal colony of the British Empire, which at that point in time was under the reign of Queen Victoria. It has often been called First Landing Day or Foundation Day. Foundation of what? A penal colony. That's it. End of story. Governor Macquarie, and this is in 1818. So that's 30 years. Just doing a bit of quick math in the head there, because it's an old head, it takes a while. 30 years after establishment of the penal colony, Macquarie acknowledged the day officially as a public holiday. Sorry, the 30th anniversary. Told you it was a bit slow. The 30th anniversary. The previous year he accepted the recommendations of Captain Matthew Flinders, the circumnavigator of the continent, and he suggested, that's Flinders, suggested to Macquarie that it be called Australia. Let that sink in for a minute. 30 years after the first colonists landed. In 1838, the proclamation of an annual public holiday on the 26th of January marked the jubilee of the British occupation of New South Wales. Note the use of the words there. British occupation of New South Wales. No mention of country called Australia. No mention of a separate entity. New South Wales was still a part of the British Empire. Moving along. Let's get up to the 20th century. 1901. In fact, New Year's Day, 1901. It's a date that sort of rings pretty true to me. The Australian colonies federated to form the Commonwealth of Australia. Wait for this. The Union Jack continued as the national flag, taking precedence over the Australian red and blue shipping ensigns, which had been gazetted in 1903. Melbourne was the interim federal capital. The Australian Capital Territory wasn't created until 1908. The federal capital, to be named Canberra, was not selected until 1913. The first Parliament House to operate out of Canberra didn't open until 1927. These are all facts, they're all available. So, moving along. In 1938, state premiers celebrated the sesquicentenary together in Sydney. Aboriginal leaders met there for a day of mourning to protest at their mistreatment by white Australians and to seek full citizenship rights. It's 1938. 1948, 10 years later, the Nationality and Citizenship Act created a symbolic, note that word, symbolic, Australian citizenship. Australians remained British citizens at that point in time. In 1954, the Australian Blue Ensign, that thing on the wall behind me, the Australian Blue Ensign was designated the Australian national flag and given precedence over the Union Jack. The Australian Red Ensign was retained as the commercial shipping ensign. Now, I have a problem with that thing on the wall, because if the Blue Ensign takes precedence over the Union Jack, why does the Union Jack still appear in the top left corner? Ponder. In recent days, there's been a lot of talk about shifting the date of Straya Day. There's been a lot of other dates mentioned. Federation Day, that one rings a bell with me. That one rings true. January 1st, 1901, when the Constitution, which we operate under today, was established. To me, that is when this nation was established. That is when we became Australia. Remember the date that Matthew Flinders told Governor Macquarie that we should refer to this continent as Australia? Long time ago. 1901, we became Australia. There's another date being bandied around, when the government apologised to the stolen generation, 13th of February, back in 2008. Well, from my point of view, yes, that was nice, it was needed, it was well received, but it's not an Australia Day. That was an act of government apologising for previous governments. End of story. Bloody good bourbon too, by the way. What about the day Canberra was selected as our capital? the 20th of March 1913. Does anybody really care? I don't. I couldn't give a rat's ass. Canberra is a very sterile place, I'll give you that. Very, very sterile place. It's a place where federal public servants live and enact their daily duties. End of story. It's the seat of government. It is not definitive of the Australian spirit, and it is not definitive of what Australia needs to represent. What about the day the white Australia was abolished? The 11th of April 1973. Now, 1973, hey, those of us who care, we remember. Because it was time. We'd had enough. Conservatism had grown old. In fact, it hasn't gotten any younger today. Yeah, okay. It's a step forward. That enaction of government, that abolition of the White Australia policy, yeah, that goes towards making us who we are today. It's not representative of who we are today. So I'm ignoring that one. Oh, the day Advance Australia Fair was proclaimed as our national anthem. The 19th of April. You know what? Fuck that. That particular piece of music sucks great big hairy gorilla balls. As far as I'm concerned, it sucks, it sucks, it fucking sucks. It's not representative of Australia. It was written in 1878 to replace God Save the Queen. Oh, hoorah! God Save the Queen was our national anthem until 1984. Think back. No, as far as I'm concerned, Advance Australia Fair is written in a language of 200 years ago, and it can go and get fucked. What about the day Indigenous people were finally allowed constitutional rights, the 27th of May 1967? Momentous, enormously momentous occasion. A day when white Australia decided through constitutional amendment to acknowledge the first peoples of this nation and give them the rights that they had always had. Full citizenship, ownership of the right to be a citizen of this country. Should we recognise that as Australia Day? I don't think so. I really don't think so. It was an occasion that was well and truly overdue, and it needs to be recognised as that, as having been well and truly overdue, and leave it at that. What about Mabo Day? Remember Eddie Mabo? Mabo Day, 3rd of June 1992, when the High Court of Australia ruled in favour of Eddie Mabo's case, which overturned the legal status of terra nullius, giving the Indigenous peoples of this country land rights. Anybody who's ever spoken to an Indigenous Australian will understand the connection that they have with country. And it's not this country or their country, it's country. You've got to understand that these people are one with the land in which they were born. It is important to them. It is their lifeblood. It is their heritage. It is what they pass on. It is their culture. We white people, we struggle to understand it. A great many of us refuse to accept it. Unacceptable in my view. But is that day in history proportionate to being called Australia Day? No, I'd call it Eddie Mabo Day. But from my point of view, no, it's not Australia Day. It's not inclusive enough. And there's another one here. That this is coming from a list created by SBS. The first calendar day of summer. Oh, fucking give me peace. Seriously. The first calendar day of summer. Summer starts on the solstice. That's it. End of story. Thank you. Move on. In this argument about Australia Day, let's acknowledge the fact that the first, in inverted commas, Australia Day was actually held on the 30th of July 1915. Its purpose was to raise funds for the World War I effort in Europe. Ponder that one. We sent thousands and thousands of our young men across the seas to fight on behalf of the British Empire, of which we were only a colonial part, and yet they had the gall to call it Australia Day? Do we deserve to commemorate that day? Is it appropriate to commemorate that day? I think not. It's a day in history. It was purported to support the British Empire. And my feelings in that regard are, fuck you. It wasn't until 1935 that all states adopted a common date and name for Australia Day to be supposedly held on January the 26th. And that brings us back full circle. Should we be using the date of colonialisation as the beginnings of a country which at that stage did not exist? Sure, colonialisation. Let's commemorate it for that, if you want to commemorate something. That's the day that 11 ships full of sheep, cattle, horses, military and criminal elements, supposedly criminal elements, out of the lower classes of British society, set foot in this country and had no way back home. I'll just read this little bit to you. As the former Keating government minister, Chris Schacht, points out, creation of Australia did not occur by the staking of the flag of Britain in the sands of Botany Bay. To claim New Holland at Sydney Cove holds little connection for the people of Adelaide or Port Hedland. Remember, it is only since 1994 that the anniversary has been treated consistently in all states and territories, underscoring that date's New South Wales-centric significance. The 26th of January is only significant to New South Wales. The colonies that were formed after that initial colonisation, they operated as separate entities. It was only on the 1st of January 1901 that the colonies, the British colonies, don't forget it, came together under the Commonwealth of Australia, under the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Australia. So for me, the January the 1st, 1901 date, that's Australia Day. That's the day we became a nation state. Now, are we perfect? Hell no. Far from it. We've had some shitty governments in our time, since 1901. We've got one right now. One that battles to sustain its own relevance. We've got a Prime Minister that struggles to hold his own position at the head of his own party while he's being undermined by his coalition partners, while he's being undermined by previous Prime Minister, which brings me to another point. Mr. Abbott. Tony Abbott. Tony Abbott, MHR. Member of the House of Representatives. Why people keep re-electing him? Fucked if I know. The man would not have two brain cells to rub together that would understand what each other was saying. I'll read you something that this moron posted on Twitter on the 15th of January. There are 364 other days a year for the Greens to be politically correct. Why can't they just accept that January the 26th is the best available day to celebrate all that's good about Australia? The best available day? Is he serious? Does anybody vet this shit? Obviously not, because the man's a Fruit Loop. The best available day. There's 364 other available days. Let's be honest about that. Okay, probably a bit less than that. We can't use Christmas Day. We can't use Good Friday. Let me think. Do we really need to worry about the Queen's birthday? Fuck no. She may still be a figurehead sovereign. She does not control this country. And when she's dead, we move on. We become a republic. Now, I'm a Republican through and through, but I don't advocate republicanism until Liz has fallen off the perch. I think there's a certain courtesy we owe to the Empire as far as that goes. It's not obeisance, it's a courtesy. She's the longest reigning British monarch. She was around when we were still a colony of Britain, so we owe her a certain courtesy. That's where it ends. As far as I'm concerned, once she falls off the perch, that's it. We become a republic. We move away. Only then will we have a true Australia Day. So until then, my standpoint is this. The 26th of January represents to a sector of our society, an indigenous sector of our society, the original inhabitants of this land. It represents invasion, it represents dispossession, it represents abuse, murder, all manner of oppression. And I don't care whether you like me saying that or not, I really don't give a fuck. But that's the facts. So until this country moves into a republic status, I believe that the date of Australia Day should be joined up with New Year's Day, because hey, we all have a drink on New Year's Day, we all celebrate, it's the beginning of a new year, we all get pissed the night before. I don't, too fucking old for that these days, but you can see where I'm coming from. We have a celebration, we start a new year. Why not celebrate the foundation of the nation, which is what actually happened? Why don't we celebrate the foundation of the nation on the 1st of January? Forget this 26th of January shit. All of that signifies is a minor point in history where the British Empire poked a flag into the sands of Botany Bay and established a penal colony. End of story. So let's accept the facts of history and move on. 1st of January 1901, that's my point. Whenever we become a republic, and Liz ain't going to be around forever, that day should become Australia Day. In in regard to that thing on the wall behind me, those of you that have hung around and watched a few of these annual addresses, you'll know I set fire to that thing. So, whilst it's the 25th of January now, while I'm making this, tomorrow she goes up in flames. I'll append that flambe to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. See ya. Greetings once again, Patriots. Here we are, the culmination of the annual Australia Day Address. We'll have a little bit of scout fluid, a little bit of flambe, and we'll get rid of this piece of shit behind us. Everybody asks me, why do you do that? Why do you burn the flag? Simple answer, because I can. It's one of the few freedoms that we have left. Think about that.